Hey guys, here is the prep work for today's class on urban watercolors, and our focus today is on London. So we have a limited palette. We have yellow ochre, burnt sienna, vermilion red, and indigo blue. And we're going to start by using a couple of different implements to create kind of the sharp edges of some characteristic London features. So you'll want to have a little bit of card, so just some scrap paper is fine. A flat brush, can be any size. And in class we'll also be using an angled brush. All of these are going to create more or less the same effect, giving us a sharp edge and essentially allowing us to create perspective without thinking about it too much. So before we go into perspective, we're just going to think about two things. We're going to think about angles. Are the angles moving in this direction, so like a greater than sign going this way, or in this direction? Those are the only things we need to think about at the moment. And we're going to start by looking at a London telephone booth. So you're going to look at the upper angles of the booth and the lower angles, and these are going to be the edges of our booth. Instead of starting with red, I'm going to start with a color that's kind of going behind the windows. So I'm going to start with a yellow ochre, a very pale yellow ochre. And I'm also going to use a very pale version of that indigo blue. So with watercolors, you can layer darker colors over lighter ones. You can't make anything lighter, but you can, if you have a stronger color, layer that over the lighter one. So that's how we're going to work to keep things simple. I'm going to start by creating an angle for the side of the telephone booth, this way, before moving back in this direction and then getting the angle on the other side, the base of it. And then as I move into the other side of the window, of this telephone booth, I'm just going to dip that same brush into the indigo. Don't worry if the two colors blend together a little bit. That's absolutely fine. It'll in fact create a nice effect. And just make sure that I have the base tapered off at an angle like I do the front. So I'm just going to close up these two sides here. I can even just bring this up a little bit, just ever so slightly, where we're going to have a little bit of writing, and we'll come back to that later. So I need to let this dry completely now so I can make some sharp angles on it. While I do that, I'll move on to another very characteristic London feature, which is the Route Master bus. And again, first I'm going to just think about the angles of the bus, what parts are going up and what parts are going down, so the two sides of it. So here, we're angling upwards on one side of the bus, and then where the windows are, we're going to angle downward. So I'm just placing this very pale indigo blue where the sides of the bus are. And the only things I need to think about now, since I'm using this flat brush, are whether things are going up or down. And let's put down a base for one more, which is going to be a telephone box. So I'm going to let a little bit of that indigo mix in with the yellow ochre. And I'm going to just start with a column like this. And again, I'm going to leave this here, come back to it later. Now on to my second tool, which is this little bit of card. I'm going to start to get some of the details of the phone booth in. So I'm going to pick up my brilliant red and just paint the side of the card, this brilliant red. And hopefully this is dry enough now that I can put in the detail. And I'm just going to use this to create the sides of the phone booth. I can use this to get the upper edges of the box. And again, the main thing you're thinking of are these angles tilting up or are they tilting down? And we'll get the base of the box as well. I can even kind of drag this card to the side to cover more ground. You know, you'll notice that some of the sides are thicker, some are thinner. We can just do this. Depending on what kind of feel you want for your watercolors, often it's better to use a tool like a piece of card or a flat brush to create sharp edges rather than a round brush trying to do a really straight line. Because your round brush isn't really designed to create harsh, sharp edges like this. Also, size is working against you, especially if you're working on a smaller scale, just being able to make these small marks. So instead of kind of laboring over creating perfect lines with a round brush, it can often just be easier using a little tool like a piece of card. Now, when it comes to these slats in the windows, again, we really want to think about whether we're looking at angles moving up or moving down. And sometimes it's better to work kind of across, so you're working from the base to the top. Usually around the middle, you'll have one which is just straight. That's what we know as the horizon line there in perspective. And we're just going to mirror that on the other side, going in the opposite direction. So these angles are tilting upwards like that greater than sign up there, and again getting kind of flatter towards the middle where we have the horizon line. And I'll just come down with some slats here. I'm going to take my slanted brush now just to do the top of this, and then I'm going to let this dry for a little bit and move on. So for the top of the telephone booth, I'll start with just an oval where kind of the top of it is over this center part, then moving back down like a little hat, and just going to paint all of this in. Okay, and while I have this brush on hand, so just to get used to kind of what you prefer to use, I'm just going to use this brush rather than the card for my little bus here. And so here, I'm using this slanted brush very much like I used the card. I'm just using the edge of the slanted brush to get these sharp corners on the bus. And again, you're just thinking, is this angle going up or is this angle going down? And the useful thing here is I can just use the side of the slant brush to get fine lines, like the areas between the windows. And then the other side of it to get sharper edges. So I can just like pull down by placing the whole side of the brush on the page to get that edge and still come in with these little slats of the windows. There's a little space in between the wheels, so I'll just kind of create that. And then I'll wait for that to dry a little bit before I come in with things like the wheels and any other details. And so moving on here, this is a fun one. For this one, the mailbox, I'm going to move back to either the card or the flat brush. You can do this two ways. So basically the idea is this. So I'll show it to you with a card first, and then you can use either this or the flat brush, because the principle is pretty much the same. You place the entire side of the piece of card on the page and then move it either up, down, or either like this, so down like a smile, or up like an umbrella, depending on what part of this you're doing. So I just did that there. It didn't show up very clear, so instead I'm going to use my flat brush, which is going to hold more paint, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking at the top part of this and just putting the entire side of the brush on the page and pulling it up. And this gives a nice sense of volume. As I move down here, I'm moving it in the opposite direction like this. And I'm just going to sharpen up these edges and then use the slanted brush because it's a little bit smaller to finish up the top, although you could do this with a flat brush. While I leave this to dry, I'm going to move back here, get some more details in using my slanted brush. So I'm going to use a little bit of the indigo to get some reflections in the windows. So just kind of, let's get a couple of these window panes having a little bit of a reflection here. Maybe there's a little cast reflection up here. I can also add a touch of that indigo into my vermilion red to deepen it a bit, to get sort of darker red details, like, you know, there's a slightly darker area, little ridges and things like over here, maybe over here. A little bit of a shadow always helps. And then I'm just going to use the indigo to crop in, get the edge here. And while I've got that indigo, I can come in and get some wheels. Get a little bit of reflection in the windows on the bus. Maybe a little bit more depth where there's areas in the shade. And then move back to the postal box with that indigo and move my brush just in a semicircle down here. Now we can use a pen to write telephone or anything that you want written. And you can also use this to sharpen up any details which might have gotten lost along the way. So, you know, with a bus, if you wanted to emphasize any corners, this can be a good way to just add a bit more character, a bit more contrast to your scene. Also details, like in London, there are a lot of little Victorian ornamental designs on the things that you see, and you can use a little bit of a pen to get some of those frills and, you know, kind of concentric patterns that you see a lot of the time. And the thing with the pen is you don't need to follow your lines exactly. So it's okay if you put down the color, but then if you sharpen things up and end up moving things around with your pen, it usually still creates a nice effect. Okay, so now that we have these kind of basic London characters down, we can move on to creating street scenes and then our full watercolor painting.